The violence of Donald Trump's attack on Volodymyr Zelensky is not only trying to politically strangle him, but he is doing it with extreme violence. Consider this. Volodymyr Zelensky, a moderately successful comedian, has persuaded the United States to invest $350 billion to enter a war that could not be won. Second talking point, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent has disappeared. He refuses to hold elections due to his poor health at his age. Third dictator without election, Zelensky better act fast or he will have no country left. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is broken. How do you understand this charge in several blows so violent?
He has been in a space of total misinformation from the beginning, even before, probably even beyond financial compromises. In fact, he has completely taken over. The Russians are very right-wing. They know very well how to do from that point of view. He has taken up all the elements of language, all the narratives that the Kremlin has been trying to instill for a very long time in the minds of a certain number of people, sometimes leaders. We see it with Trump, but they're still from the leader of the main world power. So everything that is also interesting to see is that Trump, anyway, he is impervious to several things. He is impervious to the concept of law. He is impervious to the truth. And there he holds a discourse of counter, anti, or post-truth, no matter what we call it. Zelensky, who still addresses Putin as a dictator, says the 350 billion is needed because there are no roads. You see the number of Ukrainian presidents who were elected while Putin was in office. There are still quite a few. He takes up elements. He takes up elements of contempt because he has anyway decided from the start that Zelensky must lose. He is on Putin's side ideologically even beyond these narratives.
What is the nature of the proximity he has taken up? Is it a proximity of origin, ideas, or political sympathy? How do you understand it?
What's surprising is that Ukraine has prevented Russia from achieving a military victory and winning this war. We still need to be clear. We are close to granting a political victory to a nation that hasn't won militarily. Russia has failed to achieve its objectives, including overthrowing Ukraine's government and acquiring territories. At the current rate, it will take them 3 years to hold Donbass. And then we are still going to give in on everything. And then we are even going to put pressure and sanctions on Ukraine so that it accepts anything and everything. And that's what is unacceptable. Today, the blood of Ukrainians who defended us should have prepared us to step up, be ready for war and support them. These are the Americans. For 3 years, we've been telling ourselves that we must prepare for the Americans having different geostrategic visions than ours. And so we need to know how to be sovereign. It's been 2 weeks now that we realized that maybe we should have done it 3 years ago.
In order to truly pull the Europeans, can the Europeans replace the military aid and financial aid from the Americans? Things are happening, especially in the Kursk region. Listen to how Putin claims an action in that region that the Ukrainians dispute. Listen to him.
The latest information that was passed on to me just an hour ago is that tonight the fighters of the 800th Brigade crossed the border between Russia and Ukraine into enemy territory.
What exactly do we know? Maybe we can see the images from Sujan. Nothing at all. We know nothing at all. We know nothing at all. Until we have pictures, confirmations, we know nothing at all. Experience over the past 3 years has shown that Ukrainian claims are usually confirmed within 48 hours. When the Russians assert something, even 48 hours later, the
majority of the time it's a lie. You are regularly in contact with those who are fighting on the ground. Have you heard such information in the last few hours?
The Kursk area is unique because the Ukrainians persist for longer than in other regions, staying beyond the typical 2 to 3 days. So often the information is a little slower to get back to me. Putin suggests that the Suja area, the 600-500 square kilometers held by Ukrainians in Russian territory, is barely changing. Putin claims Ukraine would have been attacked on its own territory, possibly to capture them.
in reverse.
For example, towards the city of Sumy, I have no feedback or images from Ukrainian territory. Normally, we receive information within half an hour. Ukraine officially denies the claim.
Indeed, the official denial must be read. Putin's information is a lie, says Ukraine. This group has been eliminated. There is no Russian military group capable of doing it. At the core, when we see these images of destroyed soldiers, will Europeans say that it's time to change strategy, to return to combat strategy? Nicholas Tenzer, it's very important to hear from you tonight. You are one of those who have always said that we should not negotiate. I read what you were saying. A quick reminder of the basic principles. There can be no negotiation with Putin's Russia, never on anything. The total defeat of Moscow is the only solution. And you often say that the word negotiation is a smokescreen that actually serves Putin. However, now Zelensky is talking about negotiation. The Europeans are talking about negotiation, apart from blaming Trump. Don't we have to admit that there has also been a change, even among the Ukrainians?
So the Ukrainians are simply talking about it because they were forced to do so. That is to say, by Trump, before as well, I'm going to tell you clearly, by Biden and by the Europeans, because of their softness, their total inadequacy. Guilty and guilty. I think there is a real guilt on our side collectively for not having helped the Ukrainians enough, and not even intervening directly when it was initially possible. I believe
that it's very important because tonight we're going to hear all over the European media saying Trump is mean, Trump is brutal, Trump is violent. But you're telling us to be careful. In reality, the Europeans behind all this haven't done
so much, the Europeans and the Americans. In fact, it dates back to Obama. It doesn't even date back only to Biden. It dates back to Obama. It was already the reset in 2009, while in 2008, 20% of Georgia had been occupied.
Obama, it was...
Indeed, in 2013. It shows a lot of hypocrisy, frankly. Yes, of course. And that you have Biden, I would say, who was completely influenced under the sway of Jake Sullivan, to whom he had just given the instruction. No World War III, a Russian narrative. He said we must help them, but not enough. Let's go. But where there is a change with Trump, it's that we can say that Obama and Biden were guilty of abstention, but they were not against Ukraine, they were not against us. That still, Biden called Putin by his real name, that is, he's a killer, that he denounced the war crimes against humanity, genocide and aggression committed by Russia in Ukraine, while Trump, for him, the crimes do not exist. There is no victim and perpetrator. All of this is completely indistinct. There is no aggressor and aggressed. We even saw him ultimately blame Ukraine, claiming it was Ukraine that attacked. Well, once again, we are in a total reversal of alliances. But our guilt as Westerners, I think we absolutely need to emphasize it. I maintain my stance on this matter, as stated in a 2016 article, and believe we still possess the necessary resources to address it today. No negotiation with Russia, but I stand by this position. Today we can, I will say we can and we must arm ourselves massively. The war economy that Emmanuel Macron was talking about, let's go, are the...
Do Ukrainians and Europeans have the means and will to do this, or are these just words?
It's already happened. From November 2023 to April 2024, American aid ceased. During this period, Ukrainians endured hardships but remained unbroken. The great advantage today is that the European ramp-up, which was previously unfinished, is now a reality. The European shells are arriving in larger quantities, the weapons are being transferred in larger quantities. In other words, if Americans were to disappear today, it would be less difficult than what Ukrainians endured precisely 1 year ago. A year ago, we feared the front would collapse, but today Europeans are producing more ammunition. There are other countries that have joined in to support Ukraine, also Qatar, Pakistan. Many countries, including Egypt, South Korea, Serbia, and others, are arming Ukraine today in greater numbers than before. So the Russians, on their side, they can no longer rely on North Korean ammunition, which arrived in millions at the time, because the North Koreans have already given their stock. So it's only the Russo-North Korean production against the European production. This means that the imbalance, if there were only Europe and no longer the United States, it would be less difficult to endure for the Ukrainians today in defense. But we will never be able to provide the necessary mass for it to be able to reclaim its territory.
Wait, you're saying it's impossible for the Europeans to provide the necessary mass
to reclaim
Crimea and the
Donbass? Just now, go back to the 2022 territory. It requires many maneuvers that only the Americans have in their unused desert. This observation is terrible.
Sorry to insist on this, but are you saying that, in fact, Europe is waving its arms and saying, look how moral we are, but in reality, it does not give itself the means?
It lacks the resources. We didn't try except in one area, the 6.1 inches shells. Indeed, we have tripled our production of cannons, Caesar, etc. But in drones, in tanks, what have we done? We provided antiquities that were at the end of their life, which we transferred to the Ukrainians. The US, the only country with enough resources to help Ukraine win, provided just 31 out of its 3,000 reserve tanks, indicating they didn't want Ukraine to emerge victorious. Trump is going to stop. It won't be a disaster if the United States disappears from a military standpoint. On the other hand, financially, the goal is to hold on, pay salaries, and prevent economic collapse. That, on the other hand, will certainly be more complicated.
And it's there. Once we've said it will be more difficult, but it won't be catastrophic. That's where there's all the interest in a European rebound. To imagine, not to continue what Europe was doing, but in addition trying to do more. But perhaps to imagine things, to do things differently. To give an example, Ukraine, for the relative safety of the sky, must rely on air defense systems, batteries from various sources, both European and American. But let's not kid ourselves, the American participation was significant there. There, probably it won't be enough, but what else can we do to ensure this security? Solutions exist. I recall Nicolas's proposal from February 25th, 2022. What we can do, but without going to war, we can do. The Ukrainian Sky Police. Simply.
No, but that's what I'm saying indeed. From the 24th and the 25th, I would say, we could perfectly intervene without ground troops. There is no need to send, I would say, soldiers to fight on the territory.
I want to say it will even be better than the batteries. It will be better than the batteries we currently have. Why?
We could stir, we should have, we could have, etc. Today, lots of things to do. Remember the Kuwait War. The Kuwait War, the international community fought to liberate all of Kuwait, down to the last square inch. It didn't say we're going to liberate less than 20%.
What's the difference? It was Iraq on the other side. Now we're facing Russia. Despite lacking the economic and military means to sustain its offensive, Russia persists, entrenched after 3 years of digging in. Iraq, or rather Kuwait, we're talking about a very small country, with the poor Iraqi army facing the international armada. It means
what? That we're afraid of Russia.
But we don't have the European military means alone to remove Russia from this area. Are we capable? Estimates suggest that to liberate and return to the 2022 borders, the well-armed Ukrainians must suffer losses. 100,000 men. One, we don't have the weapons to give them. And two, we are not ready. We are not ready to lose 100,000 men. We don't have the weapons to give them. And two, we are not ready to lose 100,000 men. So anyway, the question does not arise. There. Today, it is indeed the question of stopping on the sky its fire, but to guarantee that we don't have a second war coming back in a few years. Meanwhile, Russia is rearming. Look at the
images. These are images of the day. It's President Putin visiting a weapons factory. Russia will take advantage of this respite. Are we in the process of allowing this to happen? Everyone, we say Trump, but also the Ukrainians, but also the Europeans, are offering a respite on a platter to
Putin to rearm. He is there. Exactly. That's exactly why I've been pushing from the start, not just since yesterday or since Trump came to power. I am pushing for us Europeans to arm ourselves massively. It should have started to move to 4% of gross domestic product once again. But it still needs to be explained to the citizens of Europe, the French, British, Germans, Italians, Spanish, and others. We must increase to 4% of gross domestic product. And when I was talking about a war economy is not just a word to sound nice. Like Emmanuel Macron's speech at Eurasia Tauri in June 2022, it also involves taking over a certain number of civilian industries and turning them into military industries. But for it to be acceptable, it is necessary to show that this risk exists. Because indeed, let's assume that Trump, I would say, concedes Ukraine to Russia. It's Ukraine, in fact, to Russia. And in addition, lifts the sanctions. It was like in the background in the statements of Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State in Riyadh. Well, Russia is going to do this. It is going to completely rearm. Its economy is going to restart. While with 3 years of pressure, I insist a lot on this, 3 years of continuous pressure on Russia, I think that Russia will really start to no longer be able to fight. Listen to this accusation in.
Somewhat reversed from Donald Trump. He claims that the Ukrainians started the war or were at least the instigators, according to his statement.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. Today I heard we weren't invited. You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years ago and never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine. That would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land. No lives would have been lost, no cities demolished, and no domes knocked down if they had spoken up sooner. The fact that they are saying it now is...
Does this signal Putin's willingness to politically eliminate Zelensky? Are we at the point where he clearly wants to oust the Ukrainian leadership?
Trump seems content to follow the law of the strongest as it works in his favor. He aligns himself with the Chinese and Russians, who consider themselves dominant peoples and countries that must dominate others. And so logically, a European country. The voice for the UN has less value than the voice itself, signaling the end of the UN and the international system. It's the end of the Europe-US alliance, which hadn't been a true alliance for a long time. They will do everything they can. Trump will do everything he can to fleece his allies who had the bad idea to entrust him with their purse and their defense. And so, today, he will recover everything he can to further strengthen American leadership, and it will be at the expense, obviously, of the Europeans. Perhaps Taiwan, South Korea, etc. will indeed serve in this shift towards Asia, but if we don't wake up, we're dead. Is it...
Are Europeans more moral than others? Remember, in 2003, they had shouted against the Americans, but Chirac and Schroeder had covered Vladimir Putin with honor. They were lecturing the Americans, but they were rushing to buy Russian gas. Today, will the Europeans have a jolt? Which one?
So did they still have... You're implying that the French and Germans were justified in criticizing the Americans, Darius. Because the Americans, with all their good ideals, and followed by all the Eastern countries, by Ukraine, by Poland, by Romania, by Georgia, who rush behind like poodles, America has created a catastrophe that is still not resolved. Terrible in Mesopotamia, with more than 300,000 dead and a chaos that is still not resolved today. So it should be remembered that Dominique de Villepin, I believe you have played his speech, soon to replay it. Dominique de Villepin honored Europe by opposing, and the Americans threatened us with all the evils of the earth. We held on by opposing the crazy Anglo-Saxon American adventure that was followed by everyone.
This same decorated France, obviously, so...
There were very good relations with. Chirac had indeed given the Legion of Honor tie to Putin, but before the first one he had done, who was it? And it was Blair who had gone to sea with Sherry pregnant. It's the first, it's Blair, don't forget, it's Great Britain, that's the first. It's the first one we see that...
All these people, under an appearance, under the values, in reality, defend their interests. We see today the Europeans very lenient towards China. I don't know if you've seen, Europeans talk very little about the Uyghurs. There is a kind of silence, and we see the extent of their variable morality, like the Americans, but...
Not just the Europeans. Why does Saudi Arabia hit Europe when we make caricatures? And why don't they hit China when they really do? Deportation, destruction of Uyghur culture. Why is it always only the Europeans? If Muslims, Muslim countries, Arab countries don't care about the Uyghurs, why should only the Europeans defend them? At some point, we must all stand together to defend just causes like Tibet, the Uyghurs and Ukraine. At that point, we're not going to be the only fools making decisions that are economically counterproductive for us. So yes, sometimes there is a principle of reality about China. If the first ones concerned do not apply sanctions on China, we are not going to do it. Europe, it's not the same. Ukraine is Europe, and we've been repeating it for a long time now. We know the Russian plan. Russia attacks the Baltic countries whenever they have a 3-year break. That's an operational reality. So Russia, we must not let go of a word about the war on Russia. Are we going to war? Look.
The Americans, because they, while Europe is talking, are rearming, and they too are rearming very strongly. These are the tests of what they call the Minuteman. This appears to be an incomplete quote or statement. For your instructions, I will not attempt to complete or rephrase it without the full context.
The Chinese. But the reality of international relations is not that. The reality, and even since 1945, and especially since 1945, it is not at all, alas, the reign of law. States are cold monsters that defend their interests. And Trump, I don't know why people are so surprised, he is implementing a policy that he indeed announced. He was elected for that, which defends the interests of America as he conceives them. Besides, it's very practical. He said the Ukrainians should repay me the $350 billion I gave them. I wonder if he's not exaggerating the numbers a bit, but see...
Here's another one. The American economy has benefited from 90% of the investments. The local purchasing to provide for Ukrainians was a Keynesian stimulus, which is very good for the United States economy. Some purchases are made from Russian assets at low costs, generating profits. You are a French sovereignist.
You have often said, is the break now complete? Do you consider the Americans? Still, it must be said. Elon Musk joked that without the United States, Europeans would be speaking German or Russian, referring to historical events. Is the break now complete for...
You with the Americans? The break, it was already complete long before this war. Now it's the officialization of the break. The Americans are not our allies. The Americans betray us. They steal our markets. They spy on us. I mean, there's a point. The Americans are not our allies. They are less of enemies than the others. But it's been a very long time since we should have become sovereign in all areas, without exception, and today there is an urgency to do it. We should not depend on American equipment to defend ourselves. We should not defend their presence to be able to face Russia. The problem is that we are no longer discussing a potential event in the distant future of 5 to 8 years. The Ukrainians gave us a 3-year respite to arm ourselves, which we did not take. I believe we now have less than 2 years. If nobody acts quickly to ramp up, Nicholas Stenzer mentioned 4% of gross domestic product. It's not in 5 years that we need to get there. It's right now that we need to start. The
General de Gaulle, who knew very well that the Americans had abandoned us in 1940, when we declared war on the Nazi regime, and when Paul Reynaud asked them for help, they told us to fend for ourselves. General de Gaulle understood that France could never rely on the American friend because it's true that it's our friend. We
are friends with the Americans. Why?
Because we share a common history with Lafayette and others. And who came in 17 to help us against German militarism?
And we
let them down. And they came in 44. Well, they hesitated a bit at the beginning, you're right, neither in 40 nor in 40. In 44, initially they were occupiers called AMGO. However, after seeing de Gaulle in Bayeux, they changed their stance. Fortunately, it's the quality of the Americans, it's being able to change their minds quickly. But de Gaulle had understood well that the Americans were defending the interests of the Americans. France needed its own strike force to defend its security. Thanks to de Gaulle for giving France the atomic bomb.